the great conservative movement of America and of our time. A brush fire of freedom is being lit all over this country. We, as an irate, tireless American populace, will overcome the few radical leftists that control the levers of power today. Joe Biden's failed economic policies has given us inflation like you can't believe, and the border is in disarray.
It's amazing how few of the people commenting on this have actually bothered to go see what's happening. Well, Congressman Andy Biggs of Arizona actually went to the border.
Biggs, where's Andy? Boy, oh boy, Andy. There's a guy. He's tough.
Hello, everybody. I'm Andy Biggs, Congressman from Arizona's 5th Congressional District. I welcome you to my semi-regular podcast, What's the Biggs Idea? I am so excited to have with me today the great Alex Epstein. He's the author of Fossil Future, as well as numerous other articles and books dealing with this topic. His background is he's an author commentator who advocates for the expansion of fossil fuels, the founder and president of the Center for Industrial Progress, a for-profit organization in San Diego. And he's the author of The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, which I've read that book as well. It's great. And this current book, which I'm going to hold up to you, Fossil Future. I guess it comes up backwards. I don't know, but
yeah,
anyway.
Don't worry. It looks like it's written in Hebrew, but it's a regular forwards book.
It's a great book, and I encourage everybody else to take a look at it. And we're going to talk today a little bit about fossil fuels, why they matter. And I want to start, Alex, with something you have in the book. It's actually towards the end of the book. And it's a section where you talk about what happens when the people who take an opposite position than you, they minimize this, but you call it maximizing flourishing through energy freedom. And you take a section, it's called Billions of Newly Empowered People Lifting Themselves Out of Poverty. How does fossil fuels allow people to be lifted out of poverty?
So let's look at the last 40 or so years. So I'm born in 1980. When it was 1980, 4 out of 10 people in the world lived on less than $2 a day. So think about that. 4 out of 10 people lived on less than $2 a day. This is adjusted for inflation, by the way. So just think about how little that is. Like if your salary is less than $1,000 a year, this was the normal thing. It was almost the majority. And shortly before that, it was the majority. So now we're down to less than 1 in 10 people lives on less than $2 a day. How did this happen? Well, it was a dramatic transformation in human productivity. Human beings became far more productive, including productivity became far more widespread around the world, above all in China and in India. How did that happen? Well, they multiplied their use of energy, and in particular, the most cost-effective form of energy, which for them was and remains fossil fuels, oil, coal, natural gas. So this allowed them to use machines to be productive and prosperous. And we see this in the fact that so much stuff is produced overseas. Now, some of this is we've had bad policies and whatnot, but in any case, it's a really good thing that billions of people are living longer, healthier, safer, more opportunity-filled lives. But that would be impossible without the low-cost, reliable energy they got from fossil fuels. And my contention is, just as people today are saying, let's get rid of fossil fuels, and like we're considering that, well, reflect 40 years ago, people were saying, let's get rid of fossil fuels. And if we had listened to them, billions of people would be in poverty and have much, much shorter lives, like 15 years on average shorter lives. So I think we should at least be open to the possibility that we should continue the expansion of fossil fuel use, particularly because we still live in a world where, get this, 3 billion people use less electricity than a typical American refrigerator. So I think the world needs far more energy. And for most people, fossil fuels will remain the most cost-effective solution for decades to come.
Yeah, I think that's such a fascinating take on this thing. I want to get to. I just don't. I want to make sure we cover a number of subjects, but I just don't. I want to make sure that people don't ignore the positive benefits, and that's what you bring out: the positive benefits of fossil fuels. And I think that's what the other side, who is opposed to your message, they never ever can find any positive benefits to fossil fuels. And yet you've talked about how literally billions of people have been lifted from poverty, living better, healthier lives because of fossil fuels. Um, I've got this other thing, because you said, and I love the way you said it in the book. You said alternatives to fossil fuels, which currently provide 20% of the world's energy, will continue to be modest supplements. What do you mean by that, and why so, and how does that affect us?
Right, and this is on the next 3-decade timescale. So I'm not saying in 100 years or 1,000 years. I'm very focused on the next 3 decades because that's the domain of current policy, where we're told we need to rapidly eliminate fossil fuel use to the point of being net zero in 27 years, right, by 2050. And I'm arguing that would be the apocalypse. That would be worse than Greta Thunberg thinks climate change is, if you actually rapidly eliminated fossil fuels to the point of net zero by 2050. So you have to look at the facts. What we have is we've had fossil fuels. They've been aggressively competed with for 100+ years. They have enormous cultural and political hostility for at least the past 15 years. And yet they remain 80% of the world's energy, and they are still growing, particularly in the parts of the world that care most about cost effective energy, namely China, which has more coal capacity under construction, just new coal capacity under construction, than we have total in the United States. So
Mm.
to recognize that despite all this hostility and competition, there's something very special about fossil fuels. And in a world that needs far more energy, there is no chance of any alternative that, at least with any evidence that we have, is going to somehow replace fossil fuels for what they're doing or even come close to it, let alone what's needed. Again, the world needs far more energy. So I love alternatives that are actually cost effective. I'm a huge advocate of liberating nuclear. I want to do everything we can so that we can have as much cost effective energy as possible. But the facts I mentioned are why I believe fossil fuels will remain dominant, and why I think trying to get rid of them is the end of the world for billions of people.
Well, let's cover that. I have that down as one of my areas to talk to you about. Right? There's so many areas when I was taking notes, writing what I want to talk to you about. One of those is you just mentioned liberating nuclear energy. Now that's not that's not fossil fuel, but what that would be an actual energy that is efficient, it's clean, it's effectively renewable. What's going on with nuclear energy? Why can't we supplement fossil fuels with that?
That's a question everyone should be asking, what's going on, because we have a track record of nuclear actually being cost effective. The US has actually been the world leader in terms of absolute terms, in terms of absolute amount for nuclear energy. In the 60s and 70s, we had cost effective nuclear electricity in particular, and yet it started becoming 10 times more expensive. Is that because the materials became expensive? Is that because people became stupid? No, it's because of overregulation to the point of criminalization, where you treat nuclear as this incredibly hazardous thing that you have infinite regulations and infinite delays on, which just makes the costs spiral out of control to the point where almost nobody sensible will pursue it. So my view is we need radical reform, what I call decriminalization. And I work with, I have a project called Energy Talking Points. We work with some 200 major offices, congressional, Senate, and governor's offices. And this is one of the 5 things we focus on, is how to decriminalize nuclear. And I think the government needs to be very open, and any new administration needs to be very open to radical reform, not just piecemeal things. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission went something like 47 years from its inception without approving one plant from conception to completion. So we need radical change. Arizona is a great example. You guys have an amazing plant called Palo Verde. I remember talking to people in the governor's office about this, and they talked to the utilities, and the utilities said that we would never consider doing this again. And yet you have an amazing plant. So that shows you how bad the regulatory situation is.
Yeah, enormous, and I love that. And you also mentioned hydropower. So just a quick example. I was talking to a member of Congress because I was giving him a hard time because of the bullet train to nowhere that has cost about $125 billion in California, in the Central Valley, et cetera. And I said, "What are you guys doing?" He says, "You know what?" I said, and also you're letting fresh water, just go out by the millions of acre feet into the ocean that the entire West could use. That would provide you guys with all the water you need for a couple of years, and allow the rest of the, Powell and Meade to actually start filling up again. He said, we could have built for that same amount of money 25 dams in California and saved tens of millions of acre feet just this year alone. Tell me about hydropower. Why are we not able to develop that either?
So I think these are such important questions. And what they point to is there's something different going on than what we're told. Because what we have is this narrative of, oh, fossil fuels, they're emitting CO2. That's so dangerous. That's why we want to get rid of them. But then wait, what about nuclear? It doesn't emit CO2. It doesn't have conventional pollution either. And yet there's hostility to that. And then hydro is amazingly cost effective where you can use it. It's location limited, so you can't use it everywhere. But what you find is people are unwilling to dam a river to stop this threat that they claim to care about. And my basic answer to this in chapter 3 of Fossil Future is the leaders of this movement, you can't think of them as they're concerned about CO2 emissions because they care so much about human life on Earth and they want it to be better. Their primary concern is eliminating human impact on Earth. They think human impact as such is bad, and CO2 is just one form of that. That's why they're against CO2 emissions, but they're also against nuclear radiation and stopping that at all costs, even though it's benign the way it exists. And they're against damming rivers. And they're also against building large solar panel installations and wind farm installations. They're against impacting Earth. And my view is we need a philosophy that says impacting Earth is actually a good thing. It actually improves human flourishing on Earth. You want to do it intelligently, but we should stop cursing our impact and treating ourselves as these evildoers or a virus or a cancer and recognize, no, we're the best part of the Earth. We should make the Earth good for us. And if you have that philosophy, and then if you look at things in an even-handed way, you look at, hey, what are the benefits? What are the side effects? Let's weigh them carefully. I believe you conclude hydro is really good, nuclear is really good, and fossil fuels are amazing because they're the only way of 8 billion people getting the energy they need for the foreseeable future.
Well, so, and that leads to another thing that you talk and discuss about in Fossil Future, and that is the knowledge system. And I liked that term because I'm not sure that I'd ever really heard it before.
I made it up, so.
I tip my hat to you. Knowledge system. Tell me what the knowledge system is, and how does that impact what we're doing, decisions that are being made?
So I made it up because I felt not just because I wanted to make up a term. I don't like making up new terms randomly, but I thought there was a need for a term. And so what I was trying to capture was what's the set of institutions that we rely on for expert knowledge and guidance. And an example is when you hear, hey, the scientists say we need to get rid of fossil fuels. What does that exactly mean? And how do we know and what's going on? And what I've identified is that when we hear the scientists say X or anything like this, what we're hearing is actually the consequence of a system that has 4 stages to it. And it's really important because each of these 4 stages can get very distorted. So the first stage is research. So this is actually the people doing research on the ground. And that itself can get distorted. I mean, you can have government funding distort things, you can have other things distort things. But even when research is good, it can get distorted by subsequent phases. So there's something called synthesis, like the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is supposed to synthesize the relevant information about climate and energy. And yet I observe in Fossil Future, they ignore the role of fossil fuels in protecting us from climate. So they only look at how fossil fuels can make climate bad, but they don't look at things like irrigation and crop transport, let alone the positives of more greening, the positives of warming in a world where far more people die of cold than of heat. So synthesis can go wrong. And then there's dissemination. So people who take the synthesis, like the New York Times and Washington Post, and give it to us in really bite-sized form, they can go wrong. And then there's evaluation. So these are the people who are making value judgments about what to do. What should we actually do in practice? And so often when you hear the scientists say X, it's that somebody just happens to have, like a politician or an editorialist happens to have an opinion, and they're claiming science is in support of it, but it isn't. A, because they're distorting the state of the science, distorting it or ignoring some things that are relevant. And then B, they're often applying their value judgment. So we actually saw this, unfortunately, during COVID, where people say, oh, the scientists say X, but their value judgment was we should eliminate this one virus at all costs. So even if they were accurate about the state of the science, which often didn't happen, I think, but people are using their own values and they're treating them as science. And that's always a mistake. You can't act like your values are scientific to everyone. You have to actually explain your values and then explain the science accurately. And so this is how this knowledge system, even when scientists are doing a really good job, which I think often, not always, happens in climate, the knowledge system can totally distort it to the point where they're telling us the exact wrong thing was, hey, let's get rid of fossil fuels to quote save the climate. And I think that's not what the evidence shows at all.
Well, and then when you get to that fourth stage that you're talking about policymakers, and that's where I live. And a lot of times in that knowledge system, by the time stuff is actually coming to us, I remember you've testified before committees I'm on before, and you've seen it, I think, firsthand. By the time some of this stuff gets to the policymakers, it's been run through a maze that is beaten up and been shaped through biases, etc. That by the time it gets to the policymaker either is already imbued with their own bias, or it's hopeless to actually try to discern. If you come with a tabula rasa, it's almost hopeless to determine what really is true, because it's been filtered through your entire this superstructure of your knowledge system.
And then it's a big subject of how to do this well. But for example, in chapter 8 of the book, I give some guidelines for how to process different claims. And there are many of these, but one that I think is very valuable and can save you a lot of time is just look, when you're dealing with experts or claimed experts, always look for experts who try to advise you and by explaining their specific knowledge to you, not experts who try to dictate to you by just appealing to their own authority. Because a good expert will know, hey, I only know some of the relevant stuff for you to make a decision. So I'm going to tell you that. And then I'm going to explain to you the evidence. And then you make the decision. They don't say, hey, the science says X, believe me because I'm a scientist. Like, as soon as you see that, you know you're dealing with a charlatan.
Yeah, I mean that's the old 97% of all scientists agree on X. I always study and believe that science was in flux. You determine a law, but then you see a paradigm that might shift because new evidence. I mean, the Newtonian physics gave way to Einstein and his theories of relativity and special relativity. So really, it's an interesting thing to hear people come in as if everything is so totally concrete that is immovable, and thus you must develop your
Well,
policy
just
based on that.
one quick thing on that, because I think like, even Newtonian to Einsteinian, like a lot of Newton is essentially preserved. You just get more
That's right.
context. I think the thing that the thing to really watch out for is not that I mean, the researchers can be they can have wrong conclusions at a given time. That certainly happens, particularly when fields are less developed. What I watch out for most of all is just the research getting distorted through the different channels. So you mentioned the 97% of climate scientists agree. If people want to see the details on this, go to my website, energytalkingpoints.com, and just search 97%. But the basic fallacy is the agreement that they find in these surveys is at most that human beings have some contribution
Right.
to warming the planet, but it's interpreted as, like, Obama will say 97% of climate scientists agree that climate change is real, man-made, and dangerous. But the studies don't say dangerous. He just added that in. And then John Kerry will say, hey, and they say we need to take urgent action, the kind of action that we want. So they totally, it's what's called an equivocation in philosophy, right? So they take 97% agree climate change is real, and then they equate that with 97% agree that we should do our political policies, getting rid of fossil fuels and replacing them with just solar and wind. And so that's a total fallacy that has nothing to do with the current state of science.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I appreciate that. And you mentioned something in your book, and again, catastrophization,
Catastrophizing.
catastrophizing. Thank you. You would think I would have been able to say that. I said it beforehand.
You said it before, you nailed it, and I think I just made you overconfident, and then you.
Yeah, that's exactly. Talk about that and how that relates to what we're discussing today.
So the phenomenon of catastrophizing, this is actually a term I didn't make up. It's often used in psychology, but I thought it's really necessary for the realm of particularly environmental predictions. Because as you see, if you look at the history of environmental predictions, particularly surrounding fossil fuels, we have a history of 4 separate apocalypses that were predicted to happen And not only did they not happen, but the opposite happened. So we had catastrophic resource depletion, catastrophic pollution. So the world's going to become so polluted it's unlivable. We had catastrophic global cooling and catastrophic global warming. And in both cases, the world was supposed, climate disaster deaths were supposed to dramatically increase. And yet we have more resources than ever. The world is much cleaner overall than ever. We have certainly healthier than ever. And we have far fewer climate disaster deaths than ever. The rate of climate disaster death has gone down by 98% over the last century, thanks in large part to fossil fueled infrastructure that helps protect us from the climate disasters that used to ruin our lives. So what's happened is we have all these supposed expert predictions. They haven't just been wrong. They've been, this is another term I made up, 180 degrees wrong, because we didn't have a term to capture how wrong they've been, because they predicted catastrophe. And it's not just catastrophe didn't materialize, but the opposite happened. Life improved. And so the phenomenon going on is always, there are two components to this. So one is they over predict adverse environmental impact. So for example, with climate, they'll predict, oh, it's going to warm way faster than it does, or sea levels will rise faster. There's that element. But the most important element is they ignore our ability to master challenges. So they ignore our ability. Hey, if sea levels rise, we actually have 100 million people in the world who can live below high tide sea level right now. We have people who thrive in the Netherlands living way below sea level. Like, we're good at things. Or if storms increased, we're incredibly good and getting better at defending ourselves from storms. So what happens is they over predict a negative impact, and then they totally ignore our ability to adapt to, but I like the term master, our impact, as well as just nature's danger. So they don't understand that human beings are ingenious and we actually make our environment better, even if in some ways we make it worse.
I mean, your explanation is so crystal clear. That's why when I read you. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, I would tell you that Alex is an excellent writer. So I always judge an excellent writer as one even who can take a complex subject, and you were able to you're just reading along at a real vigorous clip, and that's the way it is with Alex's writing. So I would encourage you to take a look at that writing. Let's get to this before we run out of time. So we have got this message that's out there, relentlessly attacking our fossil fuels, relentlessly attacking any kind of alternative energy source that works, like nuclear or hydro. What is the policy? And how do we win on the policy battlefront, which is where I fight on a regular basis?
I think there are a number of aspects here. This has really been my focus since completing Fossil Future. I'm very invested in how do we actually develop and pass the right policies. I think two components are crucial. So one is people on the right side of this issue have to have positive pro-freedom policies. It's very important. So it's one thing to say Biden is screwing this up and screwing this up and screwing this up, but it's another thing to say, okay, what should we be doing about nuclear? What should the policy be toward federal lands? What should we be doing to manage dangerous wildfires? And this is a lot of what I work on. I call it the Energy Talking Points Project, and people can sign up and learn more at energytalkingpoints.com. And you can actually look up any issue there and we'll have a good answer already. So I think part of it is having what I call an energy freedom platform. And so that's the focus. And as I mentioned, my team works with about 200 offices, and a lot of our focus is developing energy freedom policies. So holding hearings on them. So whenever I'm criticizing negative stuff, I always want to be putting forward positive stuff. So if and when we get a president who's more pro-energy, they have a really good suite of policies on the table, and they have the persuasive explanations for them. This is another key point. I think you need supporting explanations for every good policy and covering every issue. And this is why I keep mentioning this website, energytalkingpoints.com. Yes, I highly recommend this book, Fossil Future. It's sort of it covers everything. But Energy Talking Points, you can get any question answered for free, and you'll get references. And the reason I created this is because I want to create a million of me. I want everyone to be able to do what I can do. And just as a preview, I'll send you this privately, Representative Biggs, but very soon there's going to be Alex GPT, which uses a chat bot that you can ask any energy, environmental, or climate question. Wow, and I think that'll help people even more.
Oh, that's great. I'm looking forward to that. And by the way, I think the last time we saw each other in Congress, you mentioned your talking points. And I actually went on and got some of those. It's good stuff. And I would just tell people, there's very few people who can advocate as clearly and cogently as Alex does. And so take a look. We're fighting this fight. It's real. It's a real fight. And I'm hoping we win it, because if we win it, I think there'll be more prosperity, more health, cleaner environment. And it's going to be really a positive. It's going to be a positive force. And Alex has got a great vision, but more than his vision, he's able to translate it, and that's important. And I'm grateful to you for that, Alex. And believe it or not, we've gone through our time allotment. That's how fast it goes. And I'm so grateful to you for taking time to join me today.
Well, thanks for your interest in these ideas. I'm grateful that so many elected officials have been interested in my ideas. I go to DC every 2 months. I'm always happy to talk to people, and I know there are a lot of politically active people listening here, and so I just want to tell you what I've tried to do for you is empower you by giving you everything I know in the easiest form possible. That's why I created energytalkingpoints.com. That's why I created Fossil Future, and that's why I'm going to be pushing the Energy Freedom platform for the next year. So I hope some of you get involved and just subscribe to the lists and become empowered in every sense of the word.
So if people, people can go to those websites. How else do they follow you?
I mean, those are really good ways. So just signing up for the newsletter at energytalkingpoints.com, which that'll direct you. It's a Substack newsletter. The other thing is I'm on all social media, in particular Twitter. I'm on quite a bit, but yeah, I think the main thing is just get on the mailing list, because that's where every week I give new talking points, and that's really the center of my efforts.
Perfect. And ladies and gentlemen, if you wish to follow me on Twitter, I'm at Rep Andy Biggs AZ, and you can catch this in either going to biggs.house.gov and you can watch it again, or you can catch it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts at What's the Biggs Idea. Alex, thanks so much. Good talking to you again. I always learn so much when I talk to you, and I really